This week we have a double portion, Acharei and Kedoshim. We have double portion, like last week we had Tazria and Mitzora. When it's not a leap year, then a number of parshas are put together to be able to finish the whole cycle in 1 year. So this week's double portion is Acharei and Kedoshim. So I'm going to take one verse. That's what we're going to do. Take one verse. There's so much in these parshas. It's a lot, especially Kedoshim. Kedoshim is one of the 3 parshiyot that has the most mitzvot in one parsha. Kedoshim, Mishpatim, and Ki Tetzei. Together, there's about a quarter of all of the mitzvot, if not more, in the whole Torah, these three portions. So the verse that we're going to take, if anyone wants to look it up, it's in Leviticus 18, verse 5. We'll do 4 and 5. So it says, this is after a warning not to follow after the culture, the religions of the surrounding peoples. And then it says, Et mishpatai ta'asu, v'et chukotai tishmaru, l'lechet behem, ani Hashem Elokeichem. My ordinances and my mitzvot, that even if you don't understand them completely, you shall guard, to walk in them. I am God, your God. And then it says, V'shamartam et chukotai, v'et mishpatai, asher ya'aseh otam hadam v'chai behem, ani Hashem. And then it says, and you shall guard my mitzvot, 2 different words for mitzvot, chukotai and mishpatai, that you shall do them. And this is what we want to teach about tonight. Otam hadam, v'chai behem ani Hashem. We're really going to concentrate on 2 words, v'chai behem, and live in them, I am God. So the question is, what does it mean to live in the mitzvot? So the simple understanding is that we'll call it our lifestyle, what we surround ourselves with, what we are involved with, should be the mitzvot. That is the context in which we live. We're doing mitzvot and saying brachas constantly, 100 brachas a day, 100 blessings a day. So what does it mean, though, to live in them? So Rashi says it's more of a drush than the simple meaning. He says to do them in this world and to live in them in the world to come. Now, I'm not sure, I'm going to look quickly if Tova is here. Tova asked a question last week that we mentioned in passing, that our world to come is no more than what we build for ourselves in this world. And for those who stayed for the question and answer period, we went into some depths in it. And actually, this is exactly what Rashi is saying. To do them, v'chai behem. And he asks a question that every person eventually passes away. So what kind of life are we talking about? So Rashi says it must be talking about the world to come, where there's everlasting life. So he says to do them, the mitzvot, in this world, and to live in them, through them, in the world to come. We'll delve into this deeper. The Gemara makes a completely different teaching from this. And many people have heard this, where it says, "V'chai behem," and you shall live in them and not die by them. Meaning that, except for 3 exceptions, that if it's a matter of life and death, someone puts a gun to your head, God forbid, and says, "Eat this pork or I will shoot you." So you don't have to die for that. You don't have to die for that. And all of the mitzvot, except 3, and they are, if someone holds a gun to your head and says, "If you don't shoot that person, I will shoot you," and we're told that we're not supposed to transgress that. Idol worship and committing different sexual relations that we're not supposed to have. Those 3 we can't transgress. But all the others, and this is a very, very real thing during the Holocaust in the camps. Some people actually lived through these kind of choices. We should never know, should never have to make those kind of choices. So here we had 2 explanations. But what we want to go deeper is, what else can we learn from this? So the Slonim Rebbe has an explanation that we already mentioned, this idea that our world to come is a cause and effect, is created, as it were, from what we do in this world. And so the example that he gives is that if a person keeps all the laws of Shabbat meticulously, but gets no joy out of them. In other words, Shabbat is not a joyous day for this person, but they're meticulous about keeping every single letter of the law. So he says that this person will merit the world to come, but in the world to come, they will be a park bench. These are his exact words. He will be a park bench, meaning the way he did mitzvot in this world was, we'll call it static, was not full of joyous movement. And so in the world to come, he will be a park bench. So this is a very, sounds a little bit funny, but it gets the point across. And this is really based on the Baal Shem Tov's explanation of what does it mean to live in them. And he said that, well, how do we live in the mitzvah? We explained that this is our lifestyle. This is what we involve ourselves with. But from the example of the Slonimer, in a sense, we could do it in a dead kind of a way, a very mechanical, rote manner. And the Baal Shem says that's not living in the mitzvot. Living in the mitzvot is through joy. That's what the Baal Shem said. This is one of his major teachings. His contribution was in the Jewish world was in such pain and suffering and oppression at the time of the Baal Shem. And he was, despite it all, no one can control if we're happy or not. That's in our hands. And so he, in a sense, brought the joyous service of God back. He didn't create it, but because of the horrible circumstances that the Jews of Europe, and especially of Russia, Poland, the Ukraine, were living at that time, it was so incredibly oppressive. And the Baal Shem was v'chai behem. Despite it all, we can live through the mitzvah. So maybe some of you tuned in last Tuesday to the class that we gave. And there we discussed the idea that one of the energies of the month of Iyar that we're in right now is joy, is this idea of Simcha. And even though it seems on the outside we're observing semi-mourning observances now in memory of the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva that died during this time period, and also for the terrible events of the Crusades that almost all happened during this time period, which is, of course, a later manifestation. But he said that there is something very, very joyous about this month, and that is that the chush, the sense of this month, according to Sefer Yetzirah, is hirhur, or what we usually say is machshava, is thought. And if you take the word machshava and you permute the letters differently, the exact same letters, it spells out simcha, in joy. And so the idea is that while we're doing Sfirat HaOmer, that the way that we are rectifying our midot, we're fixing our personality, our characteristics, our very nature through the 49 days, is through putting joy into every aspect of our lives. So that's what the Baal Shem taught. Chai b'hem means we live through them when we make them alive. When we make the mitzvot alive and a source of joy, then we live through them. So I'll just add one more thing about Simcha, is because the 50th day that we're leading to is Shavuot, and we're told that the number 50 is very connected to the sphera of Bina. And Bina, the inner dynamic of Bina, is Simcha. Aim habanim smecha. A mother of children is joyous. And we're actually taught that the children here are the 7 sphirot that we're counting now. They're the children of Bina. And so this kind of a simcha, the word for meditation comes from the word bina, hit bonanut. So again, for those who watched the video, this is just a review, but we can't review these things enough to really get them inside. So this is very, very connected, that we always read this parsha and this pasuk telling us that we shall live in them during the Sphira period. Now, what's also significant, I want to point out, is here and in a number of other places in the Torah, it uses the word that you shall walk in them. So the verse that we just read, the first verse, it says, you shall guard the mitzvot, lelechet behem, to walk in them. And the verse before it, when it's warning us not to follow the ways of the idol worshipers that were all around us, it says, lo telechu, don't walk in their ways. So I'm just pointing this out. It's a very simple idea, but we know that the word for Jewish law is halacha, which comes from the word to walk, to go. So here we see right in these psukim, and like I said, there's a number of other places that it uses the same language of walking in the mitzvot. So it's very understandable how we get the term halacha as Jewish law, because you might think, how does halacha, what does that have to do with Jewish law? It's from these verses. This is these verses that are telling them to walk in the law, that the law is alive, chai behem. It's not static. It's not black and white and what we'll call dead. It's alive. It's walking. It's movement. It's progress. Okay, so I want to point out a paradox here. Is the name of this parsha is Acharei Mot, after the deaths of Nadav and Avihu. Then God reveals virtually everything we know from the Torah about Yom Kippur. And the whole service of the Kohanim and the high priest is especially patterned after what we learned from this parsha. But it begins after the death of Nadav and Avihu. And it's dafka in this parsha that we're told v'chai behem, to live in them. Now we see this another time. The parsha of when Sarah Imenu dies, the name of the parsha is Chayei Sarah. Here we have like the opposite. It's the lives of Sarah. But what's the first thing in the parsha? The death of Sarah. And actually later on, Abraham also passes away in Chayei Sarah. In the parsha, it's described. So here we have an interesting dynamic here between life and death. So this brings us to a very well-known statement, a bit enigmatic. It says in the Talmud that the righteous, give me a second. I'll start the other way, that evil people are called dead in this world, and the righteous are called alive in the world to come. So in other words, we have this, well, tzaddikim eventually pass away, but they're called alive. Why? Because their souls are eternal. And for those who are not so good, even in this world, when they're supposedly alive, they're called the opposite. They're called dead. So here again, we have this like paradox between, well, if we say everything is relative, well, we're going back to our Rashi, where he says eventually everyone passes away. So when it says v'chai behem, it must be talking about in the world to come, but that's after we've passed away. So we have this paradox. And because the parsha begins after the deaths of Nadav and Avihu, and then it brings the laws of Yom Kippur. So we have another tremendous paradox here, tremendous paradox. And I can only do it in short because of limited time. But it's obvious that Nadav and Avihu did something not right. They brought an offering that was not commanded. And in the process, God took their souls. They left this world. And what did they do? They took incense. They took coals from the altar and they put incense on it. And they went into the Holy of Holies. So one would think the very last thing that we would want the high priest to do for all of Israel was to take coals from the altar, put incense on them, and go into the Holy of Holies. Well, didn't Nadav and Avihu die doing that? Didn't they do something wrong? But here we see that they did do something wrong. There are many, many opinions. I think we covered this in previous classes, at least some of it. For those who want, in Orchard of Delights, look in Parshat Shmini and this Parsha. But they also did something very, very right, so that the Torah says, in a sense, what they did right, that's what the Kohen Gadol should do. So I'm only mentioning this because it begins the Parsha. And we have a tradition that is from the Zohar and the Ari, that later on in the book of Numbers, there's a whole incident where Bilam is trying to get the Jews, trying to curse the Jews, and God only puts blessings in his mouth. But at the end, he comes up with a way to curse the Jews, in a sense, by getting them to sin. And so he helped engineer a whole sexual thing with the daughters of Midian and Moab, and a plague broke out. And Pinchas, no one knew what to do, including Moshe. And Pinchas respectfully reminded Moshe what should be done according to Jewish law at this point. And Moshe said, if you thought about it, you do it. And it says Pinchas went and he killed Zimri and Cosby. The Zohar says at that very moment, what gave Pinchas such strength? Even Moshe was frozen. He didn't know what to do, or he didn't know how to do it. So the Zohar and the Ari say that the souls of Nadav and Avihu appeared, manifested themselves in Pinchas to give him the strength to do what he did. Later, the Talmud says, Pinchas, hu Eliyahu. He's Elijah the prophet. And what do we say about Elijah the prophet? That in a sense, his soul was transformed into an angelic energy that lives forever. So here, this is a very, very deep connection of v'chai b'hem. Nadav and Avihu, their lives ended with what they did, but not their souls. Their souls reappear in Pinchas, and then reappear in Eliyahu. And Eliyahu, in a sense, is everywhere. So here we see a beautiful example of the eternity of the soul in this parsha. Okay, with the few minutes we have left, I just want to connect where it says v'chai behem. So chai, everyone knows, is gematria 18, and it means life. So this is one of the reasons, and I remember it was a few weeks ago, we were learning about the different reasons that the sages created 18 blessings for the original Amidah. And I mentioned a whole bunch. I can't remember, maybe it was Brenda or someone else pointed out that the most simple is that 18 equals chai. And so when we're praying, we're praying for life force. So this is connected to what the sages say, that prayer is called chayei sha'ah, life of the moment, and learning Torah is called chayei olam, everlasting life. So this is what we always say. You don't take anything to the grave other than the Torah that you learned, the mitzvot that you did, and the good deeds that you did. That's all you take from this world, and that becomes the world to come. That's exactly what Rashi was saying as he explained, and to live in them, to do them in this world, but to live with them forever in the world to come. So we'll make one more connection. And even though there are different traditions, but many, many, many people have the tradition of lighting Shabbos candles 18 minutes before sunset. Not everyone does it. Of course, in Yerushalayim, they have a tradition to light 42 minutes before. But outside of Yerushalayim, many, many, many people light 18 minutes before, there's a good reason halachically, because let's say the batteries in all of your clocks broke down. You don't live by the horizon. You can't exactly see where the sun goes down. So you have a time to do it, but to be sure, we add 18 minutes. But there's also a deep reason here, is we're told that Shabbat is 1/60th of the world to come. 1/60th of the world to come. So someone might say, that's it? Only 1/60th? So we apply the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, who says that when you hold on to a part of an essential whole, you hold on to the whole thing. So if we, from our part, hold on to Shabbat, so Shabbat, in a sense, is holding on to the world to come. They're linked together. And so many people have the image, the visualization that on Shabbat, we return to the Garden of Eden. And this is all connected with the 1/60th of the world to come. Or like we say in the Shema, like the heavens on the earth. That Shabbat is a time to enjoy this world, but to also taste the world to come, to hold on to life, chai, in the world to come. And especially when women make this motion, when they light candles, like bringing in the infinite light, bringing in an experience of the world to come. So I think that's a good place to stop, but we always end with a bracha. And very, very simply is that we should live in the mitzvot. And not just that we should live in the mitzvot, but they should enliven us. Because when we do it with joy, and we do it and we put our life force into doing the mitzvot, so it's a return investment. We become enlivened by the mitzvah. So we should all yearn for that and strive for that.